She's here? The whisper tore through the grand ballroom of the Lotte Hotel Sol like a blade through silk. Heads turned, champagne glasses froze midair, conversations died in the middle of sentences. Even the live orchestra in the corner stumbled on a note before recovering too late because half the room had already stopped listening to them entirely. Yu Jae-in heard the commotion from across the room and turned slowly, the easy, confident smile still sitting on his face. Sua's hand resting on his arm, in the way he had specifically asked her to hold it visible, deliberate, a statement. He followed the direction of every turned head toward the grand entrance at the top of the sweeping marble staircase. And the smile died. She stood at the top of those stairs, the way a woman stands when she has been waiting her entire life for exactly this moment and has decided to make every single second of it count. Victory. His wife. The woman he had left at home tonight because he was ashamed of her. She was wearing a gown that did not look real, ivory and gold, structured at the shoulders and flowing into a train that moved behind her like something alive. 10,000 hand-sewn gemstones catching the chandelier light and scattering it across every wall and ceiling in the room like she had arrived wearing the sun itself. Her hair was pinned in a clean, sculptural style that showed the perfect stillness of her face. She wore no excessive jewelry. She carried no clutch. She needed nothing extra because nothing in that room could add to what she already was. She descended the staircase slowly, and Yu Jae-in felt something cold move through his chest that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. He just did not know yet that the coldness had a name. It was called consequence. 14 hours earlier, Victory had woken up at 6 a.m. and lain in bed for exactly 4 minutes, staring at the ceiling. Then she got up, put on her robe, walked down the hallway past the room Jae-in was still sleeping in, and went directly to her home office. The room her husband called her hobby room because he had never once bothered to ask what she actually did inside it. She sat down at her desk, opened her laptop, and pulled up the Axiom Capital Group internal dashboard. The notification was already there, clean, precise, time-stamped at 12:01 a.m. Loan Agreement Ref. AXM 2019YGI. Repayment Deadline. April 29th, 2026. 23:59. Status. Defaulted. Asset Transfer. Complete EYG Corporation now held under Axiom Capital Group. She read it once, closed the laptop, and sat quietly for a moment with her hands folded in her lap. She felt no excitement, no anger, no triumph, not yet, just a deep settled stillness that she recognized as the feeling of something that had been unfinished for a very long time, finally clicking into place. She had not engineered this moment. She had not planned it like a villain in a story. She had simply run her company with excellence and integrity for years, and the consequences of Jae-in's own carelessness had arrived on their own schedule, completely independent of her feelings about him. She made herself a cup of tea, ate breakfast alone at the kitchen island, the same kitchen island where she had eaten alone for most of their 5-year marriage. Then she walked back upstairs, past Jae-in's room again, and heard him already on his phone, his voice bright and animated in a way it never was when he spoke to her. She did not stop walking. She had a dress to get into. Jae-in spent the morning of the gala in an excellent mood. He worked out for 45 minutes in his home gym, took a long shower, had his housekeeper press his custom tuxedo, and called Sua twice, once to confirm her stylist had arrived, and once simply because he wanted to hear her voice, bright and admiring, telling him how perfect the evening was going to be. He passed Victory in the hallway at 10 a.m. She was carrying a cup of tea and wearing a simple house dress. She looked calm, unbothered. But the way she always looked and the way he had always quietly resented because he had never been able to rattle her the way she occasionally rattled him without even trying. "I have the Hansong Gala tonight," he said. Not an explanation, not an apology. Just information delivered to the air between them, the way you might tell a housekeeper about a schedule change. "I know," Victory said. "I'll be back late." "Okay." She walked past him toward the kitchen, and he watched her go with a feeling he could not name, something between relief and a discomfort he chose not to examine. He told himself she was fine. She was always fine. She had her books and her hobby room and her quiet routines, and she never complained. What he did not see was that she was already smiling, slightly, just at the corners of her mouth, facing away from him so he could not read it. She was thinking about the dress hanging in the back of her private wardrobe, the one she had been saving for exactly the right moment. The one her head designer, at the atelier she secretly owned, had spent 8 months constructing by hand. Tonight was the right moment. Choi Ji-hoon had been trying to reach the owner of Axiom Capital Group for 4 months. It had started as a routine business development initiative. YJI Corporation's research team had flagged Axiom Capital Group as one of the fastest-growing and most strategically aligned investment firms in Asia, the kind of partner that could take YJI's international expansion from ambitious to unstoppable. Ji-hoon had put together a full proposal, had his team reach out through official channels, and had received nothing back but polite deflections from Axiom's communications office. He escalated, sent a formal letter directly to the CEO's office, another deflection. He had his legal team research the company's ownership structure and hit a wall. Axiom Capital Group was registered under a holding company that was registered under another holding company that pointed back to a private trust. With no public face, whoever owned Axiom did not want to be found. Ji-hoon mentioned it to Jae-in once over lunch 3 months ago. "There's a firm called Axiom Capital Group. I've been trying to get a meeting with the owner for months. Nobody can figure out who runs it. Their portfolio is extraordinary, though. I think a partnership could be huge for our Asia expansion." Jae-in had barely looked up from his food. "Keep trying. Someone always wants to be found eventually." Ji-hoon had kept trying. He was still trying this morning, sending another carefully worded email to Axiom's communications office before getting dressed for the gala, completely unaware that the owner of Axiom Capital Group had spent the previous night sleeping 4 kilometers away in the same house as his boss. Victory's dress had a name. Her lead designer, a quiet genius named Unji, who ran Victory's private atelier in Mapo-gu under strict confidentiality, had called it The Reckoning during the first fitting 8 months ago, and the name had stuck. The foundation was ivory Duchess satin, so dense and perfectly weighted that it held its structure without a single bone in the bodice. Over it, Unji had layered hand-cut gold organza petals across the skirt, thousands of them, each one individually shaped and attached, catching light differently depending on the angle. So the gown seemed to shift from ivory to champagne to pure gold as its wearer moved. The gemstones, 10,000 of them, a combination of white diamonds and yellow sapphires, sourced directly from a dealer in Antwerp, had been hand-sewn over 4 months by a team of 6 embroiderers working in rotating shifts. The completed gown had been independently valued at $10 million. Victory had never worn it publicly. It had hung in a sealed garment bag in her private wardrobe for 3 months, waiting. Jae-in had seen the bag once and asked what was in it. Victory had said simply, a dress. He had not asked again. It did not occur to him that his quiet stay-at-home wife could own something worth more than most people's houses. At 4 p.m., Victory called Unji to come to the house. Unji arrived with 2 assistants, a hairstylist and a makeup artist, all sworn to confidentiality, all professionals who had worked with Victory for years and understood completely that what happened inside that hobby room stayed inside that hobby room. Jae-in had already left to pick up Sua. The house was Victory's. Sua had been seeing Jae-in for 8 months. She was 26 years old, signed to one of Seoul's top modeling agencies, and beautiful in the way that made rooms rearrange themselves around her without her having to try. She knew about Victory. Jae-in had told her early on, in the careful, measured way men tell their mistresses about their wives when they want to seem honest without actually being honest. "She and I have an understanding," he had said. "She's comfortable, she wants for nothing, but we don't have a real marriage anymore." Sua had accepted this because she was 26 and because Jae-in was generous and because she genuinely believed that a man who showed up to events with her on his arm while his wife stayed home was a man who had already made his choice. Tonight felt like a confirmation of that choice. The Hansung Gala was the most prestigious event on Seoul's social calendar. Being there on Jane's arm, photographed, seen, acknowledged, it felt like a door opening. She had worn a custom silver gown. She looked extraordinary. She arrived at the Lotte Hotel on Jane's arm at 8:15 p.m., feeling like the most important woman in the room. She had absolutely no idea that the most important woman in the room had not yet arrived. The ballroom of the Lotte Hotel Seoul held 600 people on gala nights. By 8:30 p.m., it was full Seoul's business elite, political figures, fashion personalities, and old money families moving through the space in a carefully choreographed performance of wealth and influence. The kind of room where everyone knew everyone, and new faces were noticed immediately. Jae-in worked the room with practiced ease, Soo-ah beside him, accepting congratulations on YJI Corporation's recent quarterly results, laughing at the right moments, leaning in for the right conversations. He felt good, powerful, exactly where he was supposed to be. Ji-hoon found him near the bar at 8:45 p.m., looking slightly agitated. "I got another deflection from Axiom Capital Group today," Ji-hoon said quietly, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. "I'm starting to think whoever owns that company is deliberately avoiding us." "Or they're just busy," Jae-in said, barely paying attention, his eyes tracking a group of government ministers across the room. "I had our research team dig deeper this week," Ji-hoon continued. "The holding structure is almost impossible to penetrate. But we found one thread: the private trust that owns Axiom was registered in Lagos, Nigeria, in 2018. Jae-in turned to look at him for the first time. Something flickered briefly across his face, a ghost of a thought that came and went before it fully formed. "Lagos," he repeated. "Lagos," Ji-hoon confirmed. "Whoever this person is, they have deep Nigerian roots. I thought it was interesting." Jae-in opened his mouth to respond, and that was the exact moment the room went quiet. 600 people do not go silent all at once without a reason. The silence started at the entrance and moved through the room in a wave, conversations dropping one by one like dominoes falling in slow motion until the only sound left was the orchestra, which faltered and then stopped altogether as even the musicians turned to look. Victory stood at the top of the marble staircase. "The gown did what it was designed to do," it announced her. Not loudly, not aggressively. Simply with an undeniable completeness that made everything else in the room recede slightly, the way all other sounds recede when something truly extraordinary begins to play. The ivory and gold caught the chandelier light and held it, releasing it slowly in shifting waves as she began to descend the staircase. The 10,000 diamonds and yellow sapphires scattered light across the walls and ceiling like a private constellation. Her expression was composed, calm, and unbothered, the face of a woman who had already won before she walked through the door. A fashion editor near the foot of the stairs grabbed her companion's arm. "That gown," she breathed. "I know that gown. I have seen those construction techniques before. That is handmade. Those stones are real. Do you understand how much that dress is worth?" Ji-hoon stood very still beside Jae-in. His champagne glass had stopped halfway to his mouth. Jae-in could not move at all. Because walking down those stairs, wearing $10 million like it was something she had thrown on casually, was the woman he had left at home tonight. The woman he had told himself was fine with her books and her quiet routines and her hobby room. His wife? The room found its voice again, slowly in whispers at first, then murmurs, then a full rolling wave of conversation that was entirely about one person. Victory reached the bottom of the staircase, and the fashion editor was already moving toward her, hand outstretched, eyes bright. "I am sorry to approach you directly, but I have to ask, who made this gown? I have been in fashion for 22 years, and I have never seen handwork like this in person." Victory smiled. "Someone very talented. I will introduce you later." Across the room, Jae-in had not moved. Sua's hand was still on his arm, but he could not feel it. He was watching his wife move through the room with a grace and an ease that made him feel suddenly, horribly, like a stranger in a space she owned completely. Ji-hoon stepped closer to him. His voice was very quiet. Jae-in, that woman, your wife, where did you say she was from? End quote. Lagos, Jae-in said. His voice came out strangely flat. Ji-hoon was already pulling out his phone. His hands were not entirely steady. He was pulling up the research file his team had compiled on Axiom Capital Group. The private trust, registered in Lagos, Nigeria, in 2018. The holding company, with no public face. The owner, nobody could find. He read the file. Then, he looked up at Victory. Then, back at the file. The champagne glass slipped from his fingers. A waiter caught it before it hit the floor. Ji-hoon turned to Jae-in slowly. His face had gone completely white. Jae-in, he said carefully, I need you to tell me your wife's full name. The truth does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives the way it arrived that night quietly, through a phone screen, in a crowded room full of Seoul's most powerful people, while an orchestra played and champagne flowed and a woman in a $10 million dress accepted a business card from a magazine editor without breaking her smile. Ji-hoon showed Jae-in the screen. He did not need to say anything. The document said everything. The Lagos registration, the holding structure, the private trust. And at the very center of it, buried under 2 layers of corporate architecture, the way a diamond is buried under layers of earth, one name. Victory. Jae-in read it 3 times. The way a man reads something that cannot be true, and keeps reading, hoping the words will rearrange themselves into something more manageable. They did not rearrange. She owns Axiom Capital Group, Ji-hoon said. His voice was barely above a whisper. Jae-in, she has owned it for 4 years. The loan, our loan, the deadline was last night at midnight, which means as of 12/1 this morning, YJI Corporation. Stop. Jae-in's voice came out broken. Belongs to her. The room kept moving around them. Nobody near them knew yet. The music had started again. Soo-ah was saying something beside him that he could not hear because there was a sound in his ears like rushing water. He looked across the room at Victory. She was laughing softly at something the editor had said, completely at ease, completely unbothered, wearing $10 million, and the quiet, unshakable confidence of a woman who had spent 5 years being invisible in her own home and had used every single one of those years to build something immovable. She had not come tonight for revenge. She had come because she had been invited by a city that was finally ready to see her, by a life that had finally caught up to everything she had quietly built inside it. She turned then, just slightly, and her eyes found Jae-in across the room, direct, calm, and completely clear. She did not smile at him. She did not gloat. She simply looked at him the way you look at a chapter of your life that is finally peacefully over. Then she looked away and went back to her conversation. Outside, the Han River moved quietly through the Seoul night, unbothered and continuous, the way it always had. Inside the ballroom of the Lotte Hotel, Yoo Jae-in stood very still in his expensive tuxedo, holding nothing, no company, no dignity, no version of the evening he had planned, while the woman he had spent 5 years making invisible stood in the center of the room and shone. He had built his empire with his name. She had built hers in silence. And silence, it turned out, had been the more powerful foundation all along. The moral lesson of this story is that never mistake someone's silence for weakness, never confuse someone's humility for ignorance, and never be so busy chasing the world's approval that you fail to see the empire quietly being built right beside you.